and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, and it is Friday, April 11th, and it's our pleasure to be joined in the virtual studio today by Marguerite Edelman, who's the Vice President of the Board of Directors of the Vermont League of Women Voters. She's here to discuss with us the SAVE Act, shorthand for Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. It was introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives this year, early in January, and by a remarkable coincidence of, I'm not sure if it's good timing or not, it did pass the U.S. Congress yesterday by a 220 to 208 vote, and now goes on to the U.S. Senate for further consideration. So I guess our timing is great, Marguerite. But it certainly is unusual when that happens like this. But anyway, I guess the SAVE Act, as it's called, would require some new restrictions on people when they go register to vote, or may have to register again to vote. But I just wondered, to get us started, I wonder if you could walk us through what the Act as written at the moment contains, and why it is that the League of Women Voters is not in favor of this legislation.
Okay, I should begin by saying that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. That means we don't support candidates for office. We hold candidate forums and give everyone an equal chance. But in terms of legislation and things that will protect, which will interfere with voting rights or restrict voting rights, that's something that we do usually take a stand on. And the reason we're taking a stand on the SAVE Act is that we believe it offers horrible restrictions on voting rights in this country. We're already not very good at voting in the U.S. I mean, technically, we rank 31st in the number of, countries for the number of people who actually vote. But the SAVE Act is really going to make it harder for Americans to vote. It would require all American citizens who are updating their registration or actually registering to vote to present proof of citizenship in person at a voter registration, city clerk office. Online registration, which services many Americans, would be upended or even eliminated because you wouldn't be able to provide the documents easily in the online registration. So that would be difficult. You can't mail in voter registration applications, which is something that, once again, 3 million Americans actually have registered that way online. And that would mean, once again, that you have to show up at a county clerk's office where they do voter registration with documentation. And rural Americans would be really affected by this. In states out west, where that office might be 50, 60, 100 miles from their home, would be difficult. Automatic voter registration, which is administered often through motor vehicle agencies, would probably be gutted and end. And that's another way that we've promoted and gotten U.S. citizens registered. And if you had to update anything, like you move or you have some other changes in your status, you'd actually have to once again go to a city clerk's office where voter registration is done and update it there in person. And for example, like the League of Women Voters, we do registration drives, voter registration drives, all over the state of Vermont. We do them at high schools, at events, in prisons, when new Americans are take the pledge at a naturalization ceremony. we register people, and those would be completely eliminated. So those are some of the things in the SAVE Act that we have difficulty with in the league.
Well, when you talk to folks who may be supporters of this bill, and the idea being, I guess, that they want to make sure that the only people who are voting are legitimate U.S. citizens, I mean, why do they feel that this is necessary? I mean, I know there was a lot of concern, if that's the right term, back in the 2020 presidential election about quote unquote illegal voting. I mean, is that the primary driver of some of their concerns, is that there is a large number of illegitimate voters casting ballots in presidential elections? I mean, the data that I've seen so far indicates that that's an incredibly tiny number of people, if there are illegitimate votes. Really, you know, we're talking in the 10s or 20s, and in each individual election, I mean. So is that their main concern, people who are pushing for this?
That is the main concern, and it's based, as you pointed out, Andrew, on lots of misinformation. You know, right now, the media does tend to hype whenever they find someone in the state who voted, often accidentally. The example that sticks out for me is in Alaska, where I think they found just a small handful of American Samoans who voted in the elections. Now, American Samoa is a U.S. territory, so, you know, their voting in an election is probably just, as they said, a misunderstanding, that they thought they could vote because they're an American, you know, American Samoa. So we're talking such a small handful, and yet, you know, every time a state finds one person or two people, you know, who are non-citizens who voted, you know, it becomes all the rage and all the news. So that's where the fear is. And the fear has been promoted through a lot of misinformation about how the elections have been stolen by non-voters, non-U.S. citizen voters, and that kind of misinformation is sparked the fear that you're looking at. And it sounds good to people. Hey, you know, what's the big deal? Let's just have everyone prove their citizenship. Well, we could talk about why that's bad if you want to.
Well, it's interesting. I saw a Gallup poll yesterday while I was preparing for this, which indicates that I think they said 84% of respondents favored requiring a photo ID to vote, and 83% support requiring proof of citizenship when registering to vote for the first time, which is what this bill will do. But as you say, probably a lot of people just look at that and go, well, yeah, why not? But it's interesting the kind of certificates or proof of citizenship that one would have to offer to like a town clerk or a county clerk somewhere. I mean, some of them are like a driver's license by itself isn't good enough, because that doesn't indicate that you are a U.S. citizen. A regular driver's license, although I guess there's something called a real ID driver's license that would qualify, but I've never heard of that. I don't know if you...
Yeah, and I'm not sure every state has that. But, you know, I want to talk about why requiring citizenship is going to be really hard.
Right.
And why it's going to, you know, make it harder for a large percentage of people in the U.S. And let's start with the largest group, married women who changed their name. And we're talking a huge number of individuals. 8 in 10 women changed their surname. And if you have to bring a birth certificate or a passport, they're not going to match. Okay, so women in this country are going to have a great deal of difficulty proving that, you know, they are citizens. This is going to make it extremely difficult for that population, and that could be as many as 69 million American women. So that's one of the things that's going to be difficult to prove. You know, if you have it, I didn't change my last name, but a huge number of women have. And so their birth certificate, their passport, if they have one, are not going to match their IDs, their other IDs. So that's a group. Then there's a group that's just going to have difficulty because they don't have a passport and they may not have a birth certificate. And that could be rural voters, working class voters, voters of color, and older Americans. You know, finding or getting a certificate, a birth certificate, is going to be difficult. Lots of people don't even know where to get that, okay, or how to get that documentation. And I believe it also costs money in most places to request from, let's say, your county health department, your birth certificate. And we know that now there are so many cuts happening in county health departments that, you know, that particular division that handles birth and death certificates may be understaffed. And so the ability to get that in a timely way, if you want to register to vote, could be difficult. There's another group, members of the U.S. military, especially those who might be abroad. You know, their military ID to register to vote won't work unless they can also bring their records that prove that they were born in the United States. And, you know, while they're, you know, overseas, you know, it's going to be hard for them to get that kind of type of ID or to get their birth certificate. You know, and they can't easily go to a, you know, county clerk's office to register to vote if they're overseas. So that's going to be difficult for them. Indigenous tribal citizens are going to have difficulty for a lot of reasons, some of the same ones we talked about before. A tribal ID doesn't show the place of birth in the U.S. And most, you know, and so, you know, being able to prove they were born in the U.S., that they're indigenous, might be a difficulty for that group. This is a group most people don't even think about. Survivors of natural disasters. Everything in their home has been destroyed. All their records, everything. You know, and or the county clerk's office might have been destroyed where they registered to vote. You know, and that, you know, the county health department might be destroyed. So survivors of natural disasters are also going to have difficulty, you know, just getting the information they need to be able to register to vote. And finally, U.S. citizens abroad who have the right to vote will also have difficulties here. So for all those reasons, we are disenfranchising a huge portion of our population in this country. We cannot afford to lose people's voices. You know, there are other things why it's bad, but the fact that it disfranchises this number of individuals and makes it so difficult for them to vote is one of the major reasons that the League is actually in opposition to the SAVAC.
Yeah, because you know, there's already, I think, an issue in the country around the number of people who do vote. We tend to celebrate when we get a turnout of 50% of eligible voters in any election. Like, wow, that's great, but that means half the eligible voters didn't vote. I mean, you have so many issues facing people in terms of, you know, inability to get out of work on a Tuesday when a lot of elections happen. This sounds like this is just creating one more roadblock for a lot of folks. Will discourage them from going, oh, you know, it's the old, my one vote doesn't matter. And of course, everyone's vote does matter, but you know, I was just wondering, just to be clear, would this mean that people who are currently registered to vote, you've been registered for however many years, you wouldn't have to re-register if there's any question about your citizenship status or voter status. This affects those groups of people you just mentioned, but basically for most citizens who have been already registered and registered for a long time, it doesn't really have an impact on them.
But if you change your address, let's say you move,
Okay.
you would have to go to a clerk's office and re-register, or change your address. So there would be some cases where individuals who are already registered to vote will probably have to go to a clerk's office and make changes. Once again, that's another time when you have to take time off of work to go stand in a line, because everyone will be standing in line at a clerk's office to register to vote, and or to make changes to their registration. And that process will take time if we're requiring individuals, those who aren't registered yet, as well as those who need to make changes, to go to a city clerk's office.
I suppose this would also impact early voting in a way too, right? That's been one area where in the last couple of election cycles we've seen some growth in voting, and to the extent there has been an increase in voter turnout, it's been attributed in many cases to the ability to people to vote early or relax some of the rules around that. So this would make whatever improvement we've made on voter turnout in recent years, which it seems to go up and down, kind of problematic to continue. I guess I just wondered, I know there's also an executive order that President Trump signed a couple of weeks ago, I guess, that Vermont's Attorney General Charity Clark and I believe 18 other Attorney Generals around the country have filed a lawsuit about, but that lawsuit pertains just to the executive order. Would the executive order basically do the same thing that the SAVES Act is proposing?
It's pretty much the same in terms of what it's requiring. I'm not sure why he decided to issue an executive order on elections, but I understand why these attorney generals have filed a lawsuit. And the major reason is that it's unconstitutional. States have the right to control elections, not the federal government. And both the SAVE Act and the executive order usurp that right from the states and put it in the control of the federal government. And that is basically against the Constitution and the rule of law. That's why they've taken up the case. And, once again, lawsuits take a long time. Some of them have been going a little quicker with these executive orders, but in general, they take a long time to go through the court system.
So has the League of Women Voters been, sort of trying to reach out to, Republican senators in Congress to say, hey, we really have some issues with this, and have you heard any feedback or reaction from them?
Well, here in Vermont, we know that our representatives are opposed to the SAVE Act and do not support it. So at the national level, the League has actually joined with other groups to file a lawsuit against the executive order. And I assume they would also file a lawsuit, if we get the SAVE Act through. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there. But there is a strong advocacy movement within the League in every state to reach out to their legislators, Democrat or Republican, to ask them not to support the SAVE Act and to explain to them, to educate them about what the SAVE Act would mean for the populations we just talked about: women, rural voters, people of color, poor people, older Americans, the military, indigenous people, and how it would basically disenfranchise them.
But I guess probably a lot of those same senators then would say, but we have to make sure we've got reliable vote counts or whatever, that overwhelms the concerns about, I'm thinking particularly rural voters or, women voters, that somehow is a bigger problem in their minds than the issues that all these other groups will face?
Well, then we've been also presenting the facts that the amount of non-citizens voting in federal elections is a non-issue. The numbers that we found, which are like 0.004, could not even change the elections that we've had so far. So the fear that has been promoted should be counteracted by the facts. And the facts don't prove why this bill needs to be initiated. I want to point out one other thing really quickly, and I think this is important, because if the administration and this law are so concerned about the elections, then we have to question why DOJ basically took away the power of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. Now, CISA works with all the state election officials, and they actually ended funding for this. And it really looks at cybersecurity threats across state lines, including international ones. And we know from past elections that we have had election interference, from overseas, but this office now has been dismantled under the Trump administration. So on one hand, we're passing a law that would make it difficult for various groups to vote, and on the other hand, we've dismantled the agency that looks at international and internal threats to voting in our own country. So to me, there is an irony there, a paradox that makes absolutely no sense, and that challenges that belief that somehow our voting system is not working. I think a lot of this has been promoted by bad actors, and the messaging, which, to the average American who doesn't understand what these things mean, sounds good. Hey, we want to make sure that just Americans vote, U.S. citizens, that should be it. But when you get down to what it actually means, that's where we need to educate our own people here, our own citizens, about how, as a married woman, this might disenfranchise you. And we're talking more than half the population when we talk women. So it's important to keep those things in mind. It's not just a small group. When you amass these groups, you're losing an important voice in our elections and perspective.
Well, in the few minutes we have left, I wanted to ask as a two-part question. One of it is, what do you think can and should be done to improve voter turnout? We talked about this a few minutes ago, but are there some steps that can be taken beyond, like early voting, and maybe even something like making an election day a national holiday, so that it might make it possible for more people who have to work to get to the polls? And secondly, you touched upon something there a moment ago that I think is really important, is that and it sort of pertains, I think, to the state of civics education in this country, that it seems like, like you just said, a lot of people here, only U.S. citizens should vote, and that sounds like so eminently logical. Of course, what's the problem? But as you say, it's more complicated than that. But a lot of people just don't seem to be able to grasp that complexity automatically. So again, two-part question: what could be done to improve the turnout, and how could we kind of help give citizens more intellectual ammunition to work with?
Well, I think Vermont in and of itself has a lot of the things that make or increase voting. The early voting, the mail-in voting, voter registration drives, being able to drop your ballot off in the special boxes. Vermont has been really good at this. But if we're looking at a national level, I believe that Congress needs to restore completely the Voting Rights Act. And it has to pass other, what I would call pro-voting reforms, like same-day registration, which Vermont has, and protections for voters with disabilities. It's still difficult for individuals with disabilities to easily vote, and funding for the Election Assistance Commission, and to reinstitute CISA and the funding for CISA so that we can counter the threats to our voting system that make people not trust it. And I agree with you. I think we either need to make voting day a national holiday or move voting to a Saturday, which would work for everybody. But, if we keep the hours long enough, like we have here in Vermont, hopefully we can get all voters on that day. Tuesday's hard for a lot of people. Give them time off from work. Agreed upon time off from work by law. Any way that we can increase our voting turnout would be great. Most people don't know this, but countries around the world do different things. Australia requires every citizen to vote. And if they don't vote, they get fined. And there are good parts to that and bad parts as well. But, there are things we can do to increase voting in our country. We need to invest in upgraded equipment, and we need to expand staffing for election administration, and we need to have more training for poll workers. Truthfully, right now, poll workers and county clerks are petrified. The SAVE Act would have a penalty of up to 5 years in prison if they accidentally registered a non-U.S. citizen to vote. Think about that. Why would anyone want to be a county clerk? If that could happen, why would you want to be a poll worker if you're going to have your life threatened for basically providing a public service? So there's so many things that we need to do, that we can do to improve voting. The civics education you mentioned, Andrew, is key. And I'm really proud that, here in Vermont, the Secretary of State's office has instituted, work on civics education for across Vermont, and have come out with that wonderful health index on civics education here, something that we can learn from and build upon. But knowing the history of voting and how long it's taken various groups in this country to get the right to vote will certainly go a long way in helping people understand why voting needs to be easily accessible and made easier for the majority of American citizens. It's already against the law for non-citizens to vote. If you've registered and you sign that pledge at the bottom, it tells you that you have to be a citizen and it's a felony to violate this.
And you can go to jail for that.
So we already provide a number of safeguards to this whole issue, which I think are really important.
Well, we're going to have an opportunity to kind of follow up a little bit on that next week. We're going to have Secretary of State Sarah Copeland-Hanzas here to talk about the Civic Health Index in Vermont, and I'm sure the whole voting question will certainly be part of that conversation. But I guess we'll have to leave it there for today, but it'll certainly be interesting to follow this legislation as it now goes over to the U.S. Senate, and I'm sure you're going to be reaching out to your supporters to weigh in as well.
We will, definitely.
Well, all right, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks again to Marguerite Adelson, who is the Vice President of the Vermont chapter of the League of Women Voters. Hope you found our program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.